On May 29, 1913, an unseasonal heatwave swept through Paris as people entered the Théâtre des Champs-Élysées, a new Parisian building that had been open less than 2 months. The first Art Deco building in Paris, which Parisians considered too austere, having been much more familiar with the Art Nouveau style. All entered to see a new production from the most talked about ballet company in town, Sergei Diaghilev's Ballet Russe. The audience was overcrowded, making the room heated to begin with. Not only the audience, but the composer had written music for almost more instruments than could fit into the orchestral pit. Whilst the curtain was down, as the music began, a bassoon was heard playing at an unusually high register, performing a variation of a 5,000-year-old Lithuanian folk song. After the overture was over, the curtain was raised to reveal a vibrant Neolithic landscape of fields, hills and valleys, and dancers were dressed head to toe in pagan folk costumes that hung as fitting as potato sacks. And as the famous strings were struck, the dancers began stomping. The audience immediately began hissing and booing with aggressive heckling that soon drowned out the music. The choreographers stood in the wings calling to the dancers and stamping out the count, since they were no longer able to hear the music. Violence erupted, and the French police began making dozens of arrests. This was of course the infamous premiere of a pivotal moment in the history of theatre. In 1911, Stravinsky and Roerich collaborated to devise The Rite of Spring. The first 2 sections of the music were worked on in Ukraine, and for the next he moved to a rented cottage in the small village of Switzerland over the next year and a half. In 1912, the French composer Debussy played the first half of the score together with Stravinsky. Following this, Debussy would write the music for the Ballet Russe production Jeux, performed in 1913, only 2 weeks before The Rite of Spring. Stravinsky showed the completed score to the composer Ravel in early 1913, and Debussy and Ravel were in the audience on its opening night, with Ravel calling over the hiss and boos that the work was of genius. Dance is perhaps the oldest art form, with the shortest recorded history. While Stravinsky's score was preserved, Nijinsky's choreography was lost. Despite that Nijinsky lived until 1950, he left the Ballet Russe not long after the production's premiere and grew increasingly ill throughout the remainder of his life. Effectively, the choreography was lost except by those who could remember it best. One reason that dance is the most exciting art form is not only that it leapt so far ahead of other theatrical performance, but that it's only recently entered art history in the way of the other arts, because now we can record it. Not only the choreography, but the entire production, with a combined ensemble of artistic input and the way it was danced by its original cast and choreographer. Choreographers and companies are excited by how dance can be pushed into a future. The 21st century is the first century ever that can look at work of the previous century as it was in its moment, the work of masters and the work of those lesser known. It's an incredible opportunity to study past work, just as painters, writers, poets, sculptors do, in a way no other century has had the privilege of. To disregard that for one's subjective imagination of a future is negligent of what the present truly offers. Despite Nijinsky's choreography being lost, or perhaps because of it, there have been many adaptations of the ballet throughout the 20th century, many by some of the most important choreographers of the century, such as Mary Wigman, Kenneth Macmillan, Martha Graham, and of course, Pina Bausch, which of all of them is perhaps the most well known. In the 1970s, Millicent Hodson and Kenneth Archer became interested in a project to reconstruct the original Rite of Spring choreography, along with its original set and costume designs. Hodson consulted Marie Rambert in attempting to recreate the work. Marie Rambert had danced in the original production and had annotated a portion of Nijinsky's choreography on the rehearsal score. Robert Joffrey, who had danced in Ballet Rambert, was greatly interested in Hodson's project, and in 1987 his ballet company performed a reconstruction of the original based on Hodson's reconstructed choreography. The 2 ballets I'll compare in this video are the Joffrey Ballet performing Hodson's reconstruction of Nijinsky's 1913 work recorded in 1987, and the Tanztheater Wuppertal dancing Pina Bausch's 1975 re-choreographed version recorded in 1978. Stravinsky's music is used for both productions, so it's a nice consistent thread to perceive how the 2 ballets were conceived for each version. For convenience, I'll refer to them as Nijinsky's version and Pina's version. It must be said that at the time that Pina Bausch created her version, the Nijinsky Ballet hadn't been reconstructed, so it's not that Pina Bausch had seen it. It also meant that the research to recreate it hadn't been finished, so they are choreographically independently created. Yet both based on Stravinsky's score, and the very basic conceptual direction remains the same. Of Pina's approach to her version, she said, "The most important thing to me was to understand what Stravinsky wanted. There is nothing to add to what's already there. There is a young girl, the chosen one, who dances herself to death." Since all of these works were created in the same century, neither Hodson's nor Pina's is a modernization, so I'll refer to Hodson's as a reconstruction and Pina's work as a re-choreographed version. In 1975, when Pina Bausch performed her re-choreographed version to Stravinsky's score, the audience was far more accustomed to the music, which was already incredibly famous at that point. In 1940, it was used in Walt Disney's Fantasia. Roerich and Stravinsky developed characters built into the original score. The old woman, male elders, the sage, the ancestors, the chosen one, and groups of young girls and groups of young men, who figuratively age through youth, adolescence, and maturity. In the music, each have their own musical motifs and textures. Nijinsky literally manifests these characters, whereas Pina approaches this differently, though does not disregard this feature of the score or the narrative. The ballet is divided into 2 acts, with an introductory section opening each act and subdivided into further sections. Time is a key part of the original concept of the ballet, both structurally and musically. Not only does Act 1 move through birth, youth, and adolescence, and Act 2 move through maturity, old age, and death, but Act 1 takes place throughout the day, and Act 2 throughout the night. But perhaps most importantly, befitting the pastoral theme, the whole work is a cyclical transition through the yearly seasonal cycle. In fact, the music is so illustrative that Stravinsky deserves some credit for the choreography. The structure, the theme, the characters are so built into the music that they at least create a framework for the choreography to move within. Both versions are intimately structured on the score. Both versions open each act with an introduction, and the concluding section of each act ends in a frenzied dance, an ensemble in the first and a solo in the second. So, let's begin.